Hello and welcome to the additional course video for the Planning for Learning course that's part of our formative assessment suite. It's really good to have this opportunity to just engage with you all as you're on a learning journey, those of you who may be new to the different courses that we offer that are a suite that help you develop your practices, particularly those in your day-to-day, minute-by-minute teaching. And to those of you who may be on the suite of learning courses that fit together as part of your developmental process. It's been interesting to review and have a look at the course. I've had the opportunity to see some of the reasons that people have identified for why they're doing this particular course. And I just wanted to pick up just a couple of things to reflect on and think about how we can help you in the short, medium and longer term as you develop your classroom practice. And particularly some of you, it's really interesting, have said that you're working and taking the course with colleagues, which I think is a really powerful way. I know it's something that Dylan, Chris and myself will often say, that working with colleagues and identifying how strategies go in your school with your students is a really powerful way of actually having a bigger impact from working in professional development experiences. So thank you to those of you who've written. I'm going to have a little look at things, and thank you to the National STEM Learning Centre as always for this opportunity. So looking at some of the pre-course self-audit reasons for doing the course, it's really interesting. A lot of people are saying that they're doing it because they want to improve, and I think that's fabulous. That reinvigorates and enthuses me that, you know, we're part of a really hard-working profession, teaching and education, and yet we are always looking at what we can do to be better. And I know Dylan cites that, you know, as teachers looking to improve, it's not that we're not good enough, it's actually that there's always something else we could maybe do to develop even further. So it's so lovely to see people saying that they're wanting to improve different aspects of their work. In particular, obviously we're on a Planning for Learning course. People are saying that looking to improve their planning, but thinking about planning in terms of working in the field of formative assessment, so that it's about developing the responsiveness of their teaching. So not just planning for tasks, but obviously what this course is about is planning for learning. We think about the learning, we think about what it is we want our students to be able to demonstrate in terms of their understanding and conceptual development, maybe the skills that they're developing over time, particularly in science and maths, and how then we can plan for activities that help us build and move that forward. One of the things that we talk about, particularly on this course, is starting from an understanding about where difficulties are in the subject, where those misconceptions are, and where those practical activities in terms of skill development. I mean, that, you know, I was chatting to some teachers the other day, you know, we don't teach students just to go in and do a graph. We need them to understand about data. We need them over time to understand how we tabulate and represent data in that form, how tabulation then links to a graphical representation, how graphs develop, whether we're looking at continuous, discontinuous, how we actually plot axes for that graph, how we then develop that graph so it can be a line of best fit graph, how we might have graphs that are not necessarily straight line graphs, we might have curves, and how all of that conceptually develops the understanding of a student. I know in my teaching and with teachers I work with physics, understanding graphs is a skill that's really difficult. My students are older and they still have difficulties with graphs understanding. So one of the things that we looked at and people were talking about is how I can be more confident in planning, thinking about these difficulties. And for me, that's the beauty of teaching as a profession. It is a profession that it takes time to get to know your curriculum. And I was lucky enough to hear Chris speak to recent Association for Science Education conference, and she was talking about a triangle of pupils learning at the start, and we have teaching and curriculum as two of the points of the triangle, and then the third point is assessment. And she was talking actually that assessment is the fulcrum that helps us identify how well our teaching is achieving the curriculum, and then we can consider how we adapt our curriculum and we adapt our teaching by drawing on that formative evidence. So it's really interesting that people are saying that those are the types of things that they want to improve. It is that responsiveness in my curriculum and my planning, by reflecting on my teaching and adapting it and using that evidence that I collect from assessment practices. So people have talked about that in particular. Somebody talked about asking about how they were thinking about using data in planning lessons. It's really interesting because I know Dylan often references the fact about the difference between data and evidence. You know, we collect data and we collect lots of data in schools, whereas evidence is data that actually is going to give us the opportunity to draw conclusions and understand what it is in terms of the questions we're asking and what we've found out. And what we look at very much in terms of our formative practice then is evidence, data that we elicit to help us answer questions about our teaching, pupils' understanding. So it is very much that evidence that we draw on. So weeks 1 and 2 of the course have very much looked at what are our principles then for planning, and those things that I've just talked about that people were looking to develop are what we are hoping we support you with. How we can think about the learning, how we can infer, how we can develop our practices so that we are adapting our teaching, how we can consider what are the key concepts of our teaching, how those concepts and skills develop, how we can plan for those and then consider the activities and tasks we use, how we help our students understand what quality learning looks like before they begin. I often see, one of the mistakes I often see in younger teachers is that we can plan for tasks and they get children very quickly to perform without the students understanding what quality learning and the process of what they're doing is before they begin. And that's, again, one of the things that we look at to support you in terms of your planning on this course. The other thing, as I say, people are asking about misconceptions, and we do very much in week 2 look at misconceptions, how we plan for those, but then more importantly, how once we start using those in the classroom, how we stop and listen to what the evidence is telling us that we're gathering about children's thinking. And then it's drawing on our professionalism and our understanding of the curriculum and how students learn to infer then what that tells us about what we need to do to respond to help move them forward in terms of developing their understanding. So we've got lots of practical ideas in the course that will help support with this. In particular, I thought some of the things that help us identify where students are. We get students in the course to look at ranking ideas, and ranking ideas is a really useful way for them to start to understand what that quality is and start helping us unpick where their thinking is. Other things we talk about, particularly on this course, is putting in purposeful errors to see if students can spot and correct them. Again, that helps us infer about their understanding, and we do that drawing on our understanding about their misconceptions. We've got lots of different ideas that help us exemplify that. We've got ideas like using concept maps with mistakes in and lots of other ideas. So if you want more ideas, do go into the course and have a look. Now, those of you who've done previous courses with us, the Introduction to Assessment for Learning course, which establishes very clearly the research evidence in this field in terms of formative practice and how ideas have developed over time in that. We focus very much on a classroom where there will be dialogue, and we look at intentional dialogue and diagnostic questions, in particular hinge point questions. And then in this Planning for Learning course, we really move that on to deepen our use of questioning and that classroom dialogue to really become more powerful in that responsiveness in terms of students' learning. One of the key steps I wanted to focus on, actually, which I think unpicks this really nicely, is a step that we have in week 3 that looks at some research from a couple of researchers called Ragg and Brown. They went into the classroom and they analysed and looked at teachers' practices and some common errors in terms of how they were using questioning. It's interesting in terms of my research field, when I conducted the research for my doctorate, I looked at questioning practice, and the research evidence shows that actually it's very difficult for us to shift our practice. And so Ragg and Brown might be able to help you identify 1 or 2 strategies that you might want to focus on in terms of, as I say, that improvement of my practice to take forward what I'm doing and help pupils learning. So a couple of the common errors that Ragg and Brown talk about, I thought might be useful just to reflect on here. And I'm putting my hand up, you know, I think we all do these at various times. But it's that professional learning that when we consider these things, we raise our consciousness about our current practice so we can evaluate it. And it's that becoming consciously competent that we're wanting people to be. So one of the things that Ragg and Brown highlight is that teachers can often ask questions only of the brightest or most likable student. Which I think is an interesting thing, isn't it? So for me, I think the deeper question, looking at the Ragg and Brown research then, is why? If teachers are asking questions of only the brightest or most likable, why might that be the case? And I know for myself and from reading research articles, it can often be that it's because we're asking questions more often than not to get to the right answer. And one of the things that we challenge on all of our suite of courses is why we are asking questions. And we very much advocate that we're asking questions, as Dylan talks about, at decision-driven data collection points. And what does that mean? It means there's a point in the learning sequence, in the teaching sequence, where I want to stop. I want to gather some data. I want to infer what evidence that is telling me, so that then I can make a decision that's driven by that. Whereas often, if we're asking questions of the brightest or most likable, research evidence says it can be because actually we want it to make it look like we're having a dialogue, when actually it's just a monologue that's punctured by questions where we already know the answer, and we want to get it out of the kid that we think is going to give the answer. Again, in terms of developing conceptual understanding for the rest of the class, because one child gives the answer doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else understands either the answer or why that is the answer. So it's not the most effective way of using the lesson time or indeed questioning. Another one I thought was very interesting that Rag and Brown mentioned is, and I pick this up more often than not with, again, teachers who are learning the profession and who are not confident yet, or have got a classroom culture where they feel confident just to stop and call out and think about what the response is inferring. So one of the things they say is a failure to correct wrong answers. And that, for me, I think is one of the most powerful ways of using questioning, is if we pick up a wrong answer, it's thinking, is that somebody who's just made a slip? Or is that somebody who really has not understood? If they've not understood, are there others that don't understand? And they are fantastic learning opportunities if we can stop and infer, which is what we talk about particularly in week 2, infer what that response is telling me. So, you know, as I say, it is building that classroom culture where students feel safe to air any answer and don't feel that it's a personal affront if we call out that answer and together consolidate and move it forward. So it takes time to build a classroom culture where this works well, but that is something that through the process of our suite of courses, we hope that you're on a journey to developing. I know that the other day I was teaching about space with my students, and I asked them to define a day. And one of them told me it was the amount of time it takes us to rotate on Earth on our axis once. And so I unpicked it because, you know, I could say, oh, that's great, that's brilliant, but it's not. That works for a definition of a day on Earth. It doesn't work for a definition of a day on any other planet, because on Earth we rotate in 24 hours, but we don't on other planets. And so together we unpicked which bit of this sentence do we like, which bit do we think doesn't work for every planet? And so collectively we got to the understanding that a day is any object, any planet that rotates on an axis once. And then I could go with the challenging question of, well, how can Venus have a day that's longer than a year? And conceptually, that was a rich question that had some really good dialogue that went in the classroom. But that comes from my experience of listening and inferring and knowing how just simple use of words actually can challenge conceptual understanding. So Planning for Learning, as I say, is a really rich course that takes us on that journey from thinking about learning and how we plan for it, how we do that from an understanding about our development of misconceptions and difficulties, where we think about and infer and further develop that dialogue in the classroom, to then moving on to how we can support our adaptive and responsiveness, not just in the lesson, but actually across lessons. And again, there are ideas for how you can do that in the course. So for those of you who said that these were your learning intentions, I think the course will address those for you. For those of you who are considering doing the course, I hope that gives you an idea about some of the different aspects that we cover. And then this course is a part of, as I said earlier, is part of a suite of courses that look over time to develop your practice. And that's one of the key things we want you to do. As I say, do each course and try two, 3 different activities and evaluate and see how they work with your students. talk to your colleagues, implement further ideas and evaluate them, and then keep coming back to these ideas over time. So I hope that gives you a taste. Thank you to those of you who've highlighted what your learning was and discussed and asked questions as you've gone through. Lots of useful thoughts and ideas about how to overcome barriers and challenges that we all face, and practices that we all want to look to improve. So thank you very much. Thank you to the mentors who I know work very hard to support you on the courses, and as always to the National STEM Learning Centre for this opportunity.